Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
This month we read The Priory of the Orange Tree, which was Barbara's pick. As usual, our podcast is split into two sections, a spoiler-free description and our overall score. And then the second part is a more in-depth discussion of the plot and the ending, which is obviously spoiler-heavy, and our individual scores for the book as well. But first, let's talk about the author. The Priory of the Orange Tree is written by Samantha Shannon. She studied English literature and literature at St. Anne's College at Oxford. The Bone Season, the first in a 7-book series, was a New York Times bestseller and the inaugural Today Book Club selection. Her next novel, the one we read, The Priory of the Orange Tree, was published in February of 2019 and became a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller. Her work has been translated into 26 different languages, and she currently lives in London.
Okay. The Priory of the Orange Tree won the Lambda, or was nominated for the Lambda Literary Award for LGBT science fiction / fantasy / horror of 2019. It was also Goodreads Choice Award nominee for fantasy in 2019. It has a 4.16 out of 5 overall score on Goodreads and a 4.4 out of 5 on Amazon. It also made a bunch of lists for best fantasy books of 2019, including fantasybookrareview.com's and the nerddaily.com.
And now, yes. Lauren, you want to read us the back of the book?
Yes, so the jacket cover says, "A world divided, a queendom without an heir, an ancient enemy awakens. The house of Berethnet has ruled Innis for 1,000 years. Still unwed, Queen Sabran the Ninth must conceive a daughter to protect her realm from destruction, but assassins are getting closer to her door. Ead Durian," and I don't know how you guys were saying that, but I pronounced it Ead, "is an outsider at court. Though she has risen to the position of lady-in-waiting, she is loyal to a hidden society of mages. Ead keeps a watchful eye on Sabran, secretly protecting her with forbidden magic. Across the Dark Sea, Tane has trained to be a dragon rider since she was a child, but is forced to make a choice that could see her life unravel. Meanwhile, the divided East and West refuse to parley, and forces of chaos are rising from their sleep." Dun dun dun.
All right. And Lauren, as far as pronunciation, I'm personally just going to be conceding to you since you listened to the book, so you actually know what their names are supposed to sound like. So is that how they said them in the audiobook?
Yeah, that's how she was British, but that's how she sounded.
Oh,
Ead. Well, that makes sense. Her name is Eadas.
Yeah, the way
yeah,
you're saying
Ead.
Is it Tane?
They said Tane.
Tane? The weird... Interesting.
Why the accent mark then? All right, so let's jump into the first half of our podcast. So, like always, what did you guys think about The Priory of the Orange Tree? And remember, no spoilers. Barbara, you want to go first?
Sure. So I really enjoyed the main characters in the book and a few of the side characters. This was definitely a character-driven book, and their relationship with one another really shined. Due to this, though, I feel like it really dragged towards the middle of the book, and I struggled to get through it until about 70%, where it picks back up again. At least for me, it did. I do think the book was a little too long and could have been maybe 30% shorter and still had the same impact. I also felt like because it was so dragged out, there was no sense of urgency at all for the characters. I feel like they were just like, let's do a random party even though the world is ending, which isn't giving anything away because the jacket says, an evil uprising. Obviously, that's a given. So I think that led for pacing issues for me. And unfortunately, where the main hero shined as well, I feel like the motivations of the main baddies didn't because of that. I felt like, for me, their motivations were a little lackluster and were just seemed thrown in and not really, I didn't enjoy the baddies as much as I enjoyed the main characters. The ending was fine, and I feel like she left it open-ended for a continuation, even though she did mention this is a standalone, but she also mentioned in a different interview that she might visit this world again, so I feel like she gave herself that ability to do that with this, because there's everything in the book was tied up and stuff like that, but there are still a few things where she could probably jump back in if she wanted to. The world she created, I really loved. I thought it was awesome, but I do feel like it was just too much world building, and not a lot of payoff towards the end for me.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what Barbara said. I was pretty excited to read this book. It's been on both Barbara and I's want to read list since we first saw it at Barnes and Noble last year. Both of us, I think, were expecting more dragons in the book. That's something Barbara didn't mention, but
because that's a spoiler. So
there's a dragon on the cover, so it's
sure, but
that's why we were expecting dragons. Anyway, I really enjoyed the first 30% of the book, and then I really enjoyed the last 30% of the book. The middle 40% of that, though, like, God, it dragged. It was so slow and it was hard to read. There were numerous times where Barbara had to like make me read the book. Like it was just like, shouldn't you be reading the book? It's like, yes, okay. So I picked it back up and read it. I really enjoyed the characters. I thought she did a really good job writing the characters. Iyad especially, and I thought her story in particular was really well written. I enjoyed the book. The world she built was really cool. It was very detailed, almost too detailed at times. Like there were a lot of instances where, the author would spend 30 pages telling us about something, and then 10 pages later, that doesn't matter. Like it was just, and so while I like knowing about things and getting that really like vivid imagery, I get frustrated when I get all that for that long, and there's no payoff or no need to know that information. Looking at you, Stephen King. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the book. Lauren, what about you?
So I didn't hate it. I think that I agree with both of you on the fact that it could have been shorter and a little bit less unnecessary details. But the world building was cool. It was really complex and hard to follow at times. Especially it felt like at the beginning where she like had characters from one realm, but we were like in a different setting, and then like trying to keep track of everybody at the first, probably like, I can't go off of pages because I listened to it, but probably like the first hour and a half of the book, I felt like I was trying to just keep track of where everybody belonged in the different worlds and like, that sort of thing. But it was cool. Since it's a standalone, I feel like it reads more like a first novel in a series, as far as like introducing just a lot of different, like really complex plot and character, different things, and then for it to be a standalone it's kind of not my favorite thing, because I feel like if she's not gonna go and expand on it, which I don't know. I mean, I haven't read up on it. I don't know if the author's planning on making any sequels or anything, but if she's not going, okay,
yeah,
if she's not going to. This book was like super, just like overwhelming and long with information. If she goes back and like does a few like sequels, I think it might make sense for the people who invested the 26 hours of listening time or reading time that this book is. The different points of view, I thought, I mean, and this isn't a spoiler, but like the 4 main characters or whatever, with the different bouncing back and between those different points of view, was a little bit overwhelming at times too. Just a lot of like names and places and histories and trying to figure that out. But I mean, that gets easier eventually. The magic system was cool. I like magic. Go Harry Potter. But and the plot was intriguing. It was just a very like layered plot, so it was kind of hard for me anyway, to track with. But I mean, I didn't hate it. It was good.
So, like normal, we're not going to go into our individual ratings right now. You have to wait for that. And if you're okay with doing spoilers, especially, it's the end. But our group score for this one was a 7 out of 10, which is the average of our 3 individual scores. Which is not a bad rating.
Passing score.
Yeah, that's right. Above passing. I mean, passing is technically a 6, right?
I don't.
Lauren, you're a teacher. Is passing a 6?
60? 60 would be a D. Technically pass, yeah.
That's not. Ugh, that's passing.
Burly.
Oh.
You can pass with it, but I wouldn't recommend it.
So what's a 1.0 GPA?
Ouch.
So next question, podcast is: would you guys recommend this book? We'll start with Lauren this time.
I would probably recommend it to people that I know like this type of world building, and I would probably recommend it with the warning that it's super duper long and kind of hard to get into. But I mean, obviously it was nominated for different awards for a reason, so there's an audience for it out there. I just think if I were recommending it to my friends, I would probably give a preface of like, it's good, but prepare yourself to be on a 15-hour a week roller coaster ride.
Yeah, it's a whopping 848 pages, so it's quite long.
I wasn't sure the page count. I just know it was like 26 or 27 hours.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. It's 848. So it's a very long.
It's a big book. Yeah. So yes, I would recommend this book to some people. I feel like it's a fantasy book that was written for people who don't often read fantasy, and then those people would still be able to enjoy it. So in that way, it's more universally appealing than some fantasy books that I read. But on that same note, if you're a big fantasy fan, then maybe you wouldn't enjoy this book as much. So I think I'd probably recommend it to most people. I mean, it's got a good combination of some fantasy and some drama, a little bit of romance. But yeah, so I would say for most people, I would recommend this book too, unless you just say like you absolutely hate fantasy books. That's probably the only person I wouldn't recommend the book to. Barbara?
Well, obviously, I feel like this book kind of has a small cult following because it has decent scores on both Amazon and Goodreads, and a lot of people praised it, so people enjoyed it. Just to echo what Michael said, I do feel like this book was made for people who don't normally like high fantasy books. It has the elements of a high fantasy book, but not so much of it. So to me, it wasn't like in your face high fantasy. It had small action scenes to pique your interest, but not a lot of it. And so I would have enjoyed a little bit more of that. It had a lot of world building thrown in, and I would have enjoyed a little bit less of that because I feel like what Lauren said, if it was a series, that would make more sense, and then maybe she could have split all that world building into multiple books, so you're not just getting it just like a world building dump that you don't really get much of a payoff because it didn't make sense for it in this book. The romance, there was a little bit of romance. I thought that was done well. It wasn't the main part of the book. It wasn't overly done. It was sweet. At least I thought it was. I would recommend it to certain people who enjoy a bit of fantasy. I feel like people who really enjoy high fantasy might find this a little lackluster just because it had the elements there, but not a lot of it. Like Elantris. I still don't know how to say that one. Elantris. Like that one screams high fantasy and it was done well. Whereas this one had the buildings of it, but kind of fell flat. Also, if you're looking for dragons, like I was, because I heart dragons, it's a not as much as you would think, given the awesome looking cover of the massive dragon.
That wraps up the first half of our podcast. For those of you leaving us, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle on all places at Badass Lit Pod. We want to hear from you guys, and if you've got a book you want us to read, that's where you go to let us know. Comment on any of our stuff and let us know the book you want to read. Speaking of people doing that, a short preview of our next book we're doing next month is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which is a book that was recommended to us by two of our listeners, Punk Rock Pilgrim 45 on Instagram and O_Lucas Pires recommended that book. And I'm excited for this one. It's actually one that's been on my bookshelf for a while, so I'm looking forward to that book. Here is the short preview for those of you that have not heard of it. I have stolen princesses back from sleeping Barrow kings. I burned down the town of Trebon. I have spent the night with Felurian and left with both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight others fear to speak of during day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that made the minstrels weep. My name is Kvothe. You may have heard of me. So begins the tale of Kvothe, currently known as Coat, the unassuming innkeeper, from his childhood in a troupe of traveling players, through his years spent as a near-feral orphan in a crime-riddled city, to his daringly brazen, yet successful bid to enter a difficult and dangerous school of magic. In these pages you will come to know Kvothe, the dangerous magician, the accomplished thief, the masterful musician, the dragon slayer, the legend hunter, the lover, the thief, and the infamous assassin. There you go, Barbara. You might have a dragon to look forward to again next month.
Dragon slaying. So.
Well, it's true. He's going to kill the dragon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I think Barbara's looking forward to that as well. I guess we'll find out. Remember, the second part of our podcast is an in-depth look at the book. So if you're wanting to read this book, please stop listening now and come back to it when you're done. Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. For those of you that are still here, welcome to part 2. This is full of spoilers. If you're still here and you shouldn't be, then leave now or forever ruin the book for yourself. Last chance. All right, here we go. Who was your favorite character? And I'm going to let Barbara start on this one.
Just like most fantasy novels, this had a lot of characters. I feel like some of them fell flat, while others really shined. This book, like Lauren mentioned, this book is told in 4 people's perspectives. Of the 4, I really enjoyed Iadez's. Taines and Loth's the most. Roose was fine. He's just sort of an asshole for most of the book. I didn't feel much for his redemption arc. I don't think it was done very well, personally. I really liked Taines, but most of her beginning chapters didn't really pertain to the overall story. At least I didn't feel like it did. I didn't see the point at all for her, dragon trials for her to become a dragon rider. Didn't really do much except do more of an in-depth characterization for her, really. So none of those characters from her chapters really make an appearance, but one towards the very end during the climactic fight against the Nameless one. So out of them, I really, really enjoyed Iad's character. She was this badass character that also had a vulnerable side and wasn't afraid of it. Some authors make their main female badass character and that's all she is, and I feel like that was more of Taine, and she didn't do that with Iad, so that was really cool. I did enjoy Loth. I thought he was a big softie whose whole world gets upended, but he still remained strong, fast in his beliefs to do good by his friends, so I thought that was really cool that he was unwavering in that regard. I loved how he was besties with all these strong women and never felt ashamed by it or needed a romantic love interest from them. I also loved his relationship with his sister, Meg. I thought that was done really well, and I wanted more of them together, personally. I feel like they balanced each other really well. And after the 4 mains perspective, I really liked Sabrin's as well, and you don't get a perspective of her whatsoever, but she features heavily in Iad's chapters, so, and some from Loth as well. So I really liked those. Like I said, Roose was just kind of a whatever, his redemption arc wasn't much of a redemption arc at all, because at the very end, pretty much, he was still an ass. And at the very end when he was like, oh, I'm much better, and I didn't really believe that, really. So
my favorite character was Iad. She was complex. I would actually consider her the main character of the book. If you just said you have to pick one main character, I think it would be her. She had more chapters than the other characters did, and I really enjoyed chapters more than the other characters. Really interesting on a lot of levels. interaction with her and the representatives of the Priory when you figure out what's going on there was interesting. She just had a lot going on, and I really enjoyed her character. Tane was fine. I liked her a lot at first, and then she got exiled, and her story got really boring until the very end of the book, and so, meh, she was fine. Roos, like Barbara said, was fine. I mean, his chapters were probably my least favorite chapters to read. I didn't enjoy his character. I don't think his redemption arc was very good, like what Barbara said either. It's just kind of, he's fine. I think, truthfully, I think you could pretty much cut out his entire story and the book would still stand on its own without him even being in it. For the most part, anyway.
Yeah, this is about the alchemy and that's it.
You could have had him be a minor, non-perspective character, and I think it's still been fine. That's my perspective, or my opinion. But as far as the bad guys or the villains go, they're kind of not great. I mean, the Nameless One is this like overarching villain the whole book they talk about, and like it makes you think he's gonna be like this badass like world breaker, and then he finally shows alive in the book or awakened in like a chapter, and then he dies. Like that was just I don't know, kind of a cop out. I felt like Fieradel was a bigger bad guy in the book to me. He was much more intimidating. He was much more present. He actually showed up and did some stuff earlier in the book. Like there was that whole really cool scene where he shows up and burns down part of Sabrin's castle or fortress or whatever they called it.
Tower.
And would have killed her, actually, if it wasn't for Iad being there and protecting her with her Priory magic. That's the first taste we get of magic in the book, too. So I liked him a lot better as a bad guy.
Did you like the witch?
I thought the witch was fine. Like I didn't think I liked her as well as you did. The other character I would consider like a bad guy is Combe, the spy master. He was an awful person.
You don't get much of him, so it doesn't really matter, and he's not prevalent or anything to do with the story. I feel like he's a red herring, so...
You get enough of him to be upset about him. Like, he's the reason, because he thought that the public perception was that he was in a relationship with the queen, and that was bad, so he sent him to, like, the Far East, to a very unhospitable area, to be the quote-unquote... Yeah, to be the quote-unquote, like, ambassador, when they didn't really want an ambassador there.
He had reasoning. Like, that's why, like, his character was fine. He had reasoning to what he did. Everyone else just kind of seemed the reason was not in par with their character.
So why was he going to kill Iad? Because that almost happened.
He wasn't going to.
He did. He tried to.
No. He was going to kill her after she tried killing him.
Oh.
Because she was having sexy time with Sabrin, and he couldn't allow that. He didn't know that Sabrin couldn't conceive a child back then. So
True.
The public image was he couldn't have someone else loving up on the queen when he needed to marry off the queen and impregnate her again.
So that's my opinion on the characters. Lauren, what about you?
So to echo several sentiments, I liked Iad. I think that she was written, though, to be liked. I think the author favored her a bit. It seemed like her point of view chapters were always, like, more, I don't know. It just felt like that the author, she was better written to me, I guess, than some of the characters. But because that's been such a popular pick, I'll go with my second, which is Sabran. And I don't know if that's how the British lady pronounced it.
It's also British, so.
Yeah, so that's right.
So Sabran, I liked her just because of her, like, perseverance. So she was, like, a strong character. She went through some shit. And, like, she had, like, more hardships, I think, throughout the whole deal than the other characters. She, like, her mom dying, and then, like, her being pushed to, like, marry for alliance reasons instead of love, and just, like, basically being treated like she needs to just be, like, a breeder and breed an heir for the throne, and then like basically figuring out that like she loses her baby, and then she loses her fertility. I don't know. But then like she still perseveres and like wants to make the kingdom a better place. And so I feel like I don't know. I feel like she's kind of an underdog character.
Yeah, I liked her too.
And then for Michael's benefit, we'll have to mention that the Nameless One has echoes of Harry Potter because Voldemort is, he who must not be named, but pales in comparison to the writing of Voldemort because the Nameless One was just a joke. Like, not really somebody to be feared.
I rolled my eyes when she said that, but I rolled my eyes.
We have to have one in each
have some
podcast.
Harry Potter references. Every episode we have at least one Harry Potter reference. It's like it's both your favorite book series or something.
Or something. Although I don't condone anything she's been saying. That's just...
No, I don't like J.K. Rowling anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go off on that tangent, but...
Right? I can make a whole podcast about that, but...
I still, I've
she's not
decided
taking
that
my love away from the books that really shaped my opinion of stuff, which is just mind-boggling. Anyways, this is not about that.
Yes.
So moving on to the next discussion question. What did you really enjoy about the book? So we talked about favorite character. What was your favorite aspect of the book? And we'll start with Lauren this time.
I mean, it's funny. So, like, what's your favorite thing? The first thing that came to my mind was something that I didn't like. But, well, like, I was thinking, like, the battle scenes were just really, like, lackluster for me. So, like, that was what I was most looking forward to, was, like Barbara said, like, the dragons and the battles and that sort of thing, and it was just not there for me. I did like that there was some representation and it wasn't overt, like, the LGBTQ representation in the book. But it wasn't, like, in your face. It was more, like, subtle, which was nice. Kind of like, I don't know, like, I feel like some authors, I'm not going to name any names or anything, but, like, will write characters into their stories that are LGBTQ or are representative of a minority group, just to have that in there, like, to tick a box, and sometimes make them more, like, stereotypical or over the top or whatever. And I feel like this was really well done because it was more just, like, it felt more natural, which was cool. I also enjoyed the world building that could have been cut in half, and I enjoyed the different magical aspects. And
one of my favorite aspects of the book was the character development, the way that she wrote each of the characters, almost to the point where you could understand or see them. I mean, you close your eyes and envision that person, but not just see them like in your head with the imagery, but also you felt like you knew them. And I know a lot of that at times for me felt like it was like, oh, this is just too much. But at the same time, it was nice to have almost a relationship with the main characters in the book, and I thought that was really, really cool. Another thing I thought was really neat, like Lauren was mentioning, was the representation. It's always cool to see LGBTQ plus representation in books. But in this case, it was even better because it just felt so natural. It didn't seem like it was something that was like the token gay character or the token trans character. It just felt like a normal part of the book with the characters, and I really liked that. And so the other aspects that I liked, I mean, the world building, I guess I liked and disliked. I liked how detailed of a world she was able to build. But I feel like the world building was a little bit over the top at times. So I think that would have to fall into both a like and a dislike for me. I also, I'm going to go into more detail with this later, but I really liked the way that the cultural stuff was done as well. So yeah, those are the things that I liked most in the book. Barbara, what about you?
I mean, I feel like, to echo everyone saying, I like the characters. Like I said, it's a character-driven plot. It's not a plot-driven plot. It's character-driven story. And most of the characters really shine. The ones that don't are the bad guys, essentially. I do feel like she had sometimes she would mention characters and I would want more of them because she did this like side character so well. And I wanted more. Like Meg is one of those people that I wanted more of her story because she was like hilarious and funny, and her banter with her brother Loth like really cracked me up at times because she called him out for it. Like he's like, oh, the religion, and she's like, are you really going to believe like this religion that in your face it's showing you that this is not how it happened? Like they obviously made this fake religion up just to have it, and you're still going to believe it when we're literally telling you that's not how it happened. He's like, well, yeah. And she's like, well, that's stupid. Like I love that about her. Like it's my echoes, my sentiments on certain things. I liked Iad and her relationship with everyone. Like her and Loth were just friends. Like there was no romance there at all. The representation in this book was done well too. There were different people of color. There was whites, African American. I mean, I guess I can't call them African American because this is a fake world and they're not from Africa. But there's, dark skin, light skinned people. And she mentions that in all characters. And I believe the only one who was white was Sabrin, I believe. Everyone else was of a different nationality of her world building. Once again, I don't know what to say about them because they're East-West and stuff like that. So I thought that was done really well. And it's kind of nice to see someone like you represented in a book when normally when you read it's just assumed they're white people. And, it's kind of nice to have someone that kind of looks like you be such a badass character. And same with the romance. Both the only two romance in the book mentioned are LGBTQ romance. You have Sabrin and Iad, and then Roose and his partner, and I forgot his name already. Obviously his partner is dead when the book starts, so you get kind of flashbacks from like his relationship with him. And I thought that was well done, and neither of them was in your face. And it was sweet and romantic in all the right places and where it needed to be. And those were the only two characters that had a romance. I thought that was kind of nice because normally there's always like a romance thrown in the book just because. And I feel like this was done well and it made sense for the plot as well. It had more bearing on the plot, whereas sometimes I feel like romance doesn't. So I thought that was done well as well. The world building was done well up to a point. I enjoyed some of it. I wish there was a little bit less of it and we got more action or other stuff, but she did that well where I fell in love with the world, and I wouldn't be opposed to reading another book about the world because I did enjoy that. I just, maybe she could tone it down a bit because I feel like she's already done the world building, so in the next book let's focus on some other stuff. So I thought those two main things, the representation, the characters, and the world building were done well. And that's, I think, what made this book shine.
Also, just the fact that, like, the strong characters were all, like, female. Like, not that the male characters, like, weren't strong, but I liked that it wasn't, like, I don't know, it wasn't overdone, but, like, there were some badass females, and that was good. I like novels with that.
Yeah, I agree. It's a female-centered book. All the females are badasses, and in their own ways, Sabrin doesn't wield magic or a sword, but like in who she is as a character and for her love of her people and her queendom, or it's a queendom, she goes out of her way to try to protect her people, and I thought that was really strong of her as well. And then I thought it was cool that Loth is surrounded by all these badass females and not once does he think, like, if only I could try to protect them. Like, not once is he trying to protect them. Like, he knows where he stands with them. Like, he knows he isn't that great of a fighter between Eid and Tawny, whatever her name is. Tane, sorry. Tane. I kept calling her Tawny in my head, so I'm going to do me, Tawny. And so he knows, like, he takes it back around. He's like, I'm gonna, try to help them defend themselves. They got it. Like, he's gonna do his part, which is like the talker and that kind of a thing. And so I enjoyed that because I feel like that was done well, where sometimes I feel like in fantasy books, it's always the girl needing protection, whereas this case it wasn't. It was quite the opposite. So that was a nice breath of fresh air in a fantasy book.
Yeah.
So the next question is, what were your issues with the book, or what did you not like about it? And I'm going to start on this one. So obviously, first one I already talked about is that I both liked and disliked the world building. So I did, in some ways, dislike how much world building she did for a standalone book, when I felt like some of it was unnecessary fluff. I did not like the action in the book. I don't think that the fights were really well written at all. They were few and far between. They were always really short, and you never really felt any like sense of like peril or anything like that as you're reading it. So those were kind of disappointing. The lack of dragons was disappointing. I know Barbara's going to talk more about that, so that's all I'll say. But I think that's it. I mean, I mostly enjoyed it, but it was those few things. And for me, in a fantasy book, I like action. And if there's not going to be a lot of action, then there needs to be a lot of other things. And luckily, in the case of this book, there were. She made up for that with some really interesting, cultural, political, and religious systems that she built. But yeah, those were my dislikes. Barbara, what about you?
So, yeah, the lack of dragons. Come on, like there is a massive dragon on the cover. You promise me dragon riding, and I don't get that. You get hints of it. You get hints of these cool beasts, and what she did with them was amazing. How some of them didn't have wings. Like they didn't. There's two types of dragons. The bad dragons are the fire breathers, and they come from the pits of hell or something. Like from this mountain. And then the good dragons are the ones that are water-based dragons. And that's like they don't breathe fire. They do water and wind breathing, I guess, or whatever you want to say. And they're the ones who don't need wings to fly. They have like a little sack under their like neck that's like magical and lets them fly. That's so cool. Like that's such a cool take on dragons. I wanted more of them. And to just leave me hanging like that, where like Tawny finally gets to ride her dragon and it gets taken away from her, and then you don't get reunited with, like, saves her dragon from the pirates. There's pirates, by the way, randomly, yes. Doesn't pertain to anything in the plot. Doesn't really matter. They're just there. It's one of those things, and that echoes the issue here. Is you have all these cool elements and such random stuff, but none of it really pertains to the story. Like the overall arcing story, half the stuff doesn't even matter to it. Like the dragons do, and they're not even in it. I feel like she could have put more dragons in it instead, and it would have been more towards the story than the pirates. Like, what was the point of the pirates? Really, it's to further the plot, and that was the biggest issue I had. Was everything always seemed very convenient to get from point A to point B to point C for the plot. It's like, oh, these characters magically found each other, and then, oh, there's going to be a cool battle scene. Just kidding. We're going to get some fire-breathing dragons, and they unintentionally rescue the heroes so they can live another day to fight these breathing dragons. Like, I feel like anytime there was an action scene going to happen, magically, it gets cut off, like Michael said, so you don't really get much of it. And it's a convenient cut. Like, Ede is running away from the Priory, in the Prioress, 'cause she's a bitch, with Loth on the weird emo blah blah creature. I don't even know how to say his name, but he was a cool little side character that I enjoyed. It's pretty much like a big, overly fluffy dog, but not really a dog. Weird thing. And like, they're gonna get stabbed, and the Priory are attacking them. Oh, fine. There's a dragon that comes in and destroys them for us. It's fine. We're good. We can live to see another day. We'll fight these dragons later. Are you kidding me? Like, how many times can this here and save the day, and they're the bad guys? Right. Like, that happened multiple times in the book. Multiple times, mind you. Like, same with Bruce. Like, he was about to, like, get stabbed, and at one point he does technically die and gets brought back to life. But wait, the dragons came and rescued him as well. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, come on, there's got to be a
So
better
what
reason
side are
for
you, dragons? Like, are you good or
They're
bad?
bad guys, but they're helping the good guys destroy them later on in the book. So that's another thing I didn't like. It was just the convenient factor of all these characters and how they worked in the world and how things got moved, plot point wise, got moved along the story was just too convenient for convenience sake. Like, and like Michael said, there's not enough action. Like, I wanted more. The little hints that she dropped was not enough for it. And whenever you did get it, cut short or some character blacked out, and then you would be retold what happened later on. It's like, I don't want that. Like, I want to be in it. I want to see the action. I want to see the stuff. Like, the main overarching climax of the book is maybe a chapter long,
Oh, yeah, where it's one chapter.
Where Tani and Ead take the sword, like they grab the sword and kill the nameless one. That's literally a chapter. Like, that's the whole battle that they were preparing for from the beginning of the book, pretty much. And that's all I get from it? Like, that's all? And then okay, cool, like, it could have, like, the world building was not necessary for all this stuff. The pirates was not necessary. It was just a plot point moving.
Pirates were entirely unnecessary.
But. Yeah, the whole other tree part and finding the elixir for long living life, Bruce's story plot, like Michael mentioned, was kind of not necessary. Like,
Bruce's story plot was a ruse.
Yes, wow. So that was my biggest issue with the book, was just the plot. Really, like, it was a cool idea, but the way how it moved along the story was just not executed very well.
Lauren?
Well, in an attempt not to echo too much of what you both said, I mean, I agree. I think that the plot was, or just the world building in general, was good. I mean, it was very detailed, but then, like Barbara said, like, the dragons were let down because we only saw them for, like, a few times, which was a little misleading because the cover is amazing. Like, cover art.
Yeah, beautiful cover art.
Yeah. And then, like, there's all these different worlds that we're introduced to, but it seems like we spend a lot of time in just the, Ennis Court. And so it's like we are introduced to all these little things, and it's like, oh, like, we're gonna go see other parts in more detail. And it's like, nope, you're not. Like, you're gonna cross mountains and deserts and other countries, but it's all gonna be, like, off screen, so to speak, and covered within a few pages. And so it's like, why did we even spend the time learning about all of these other things if, like, we don't get to spend any actual, like, book time there? I don't know. That's just my personal thing. I think that, like I said originally, I think that if it were written to have sequels, like, then maybe, okay, like, next time we'll get to spend more time in the Iskal court, however you say that, or, like, the other ones, the YSCAL, the Iskal, whatever.
Right. Iskalin.
Yeah. So, that was one of my gripes with it. And then just, I don't know, I felt like the action scenes, I think, Michael, you were the one that said that the action was just underwhelming. I felt like the death scenes were underwhelming and didn't like elicit much emotional reaction from me, and I don't know if that's just because I wasn't maybe as emotionally invested, but I also feel like just the way that they were written, like, even for a person that was super emotionally invested in the story, it's not like a heart-wrenching, like, it wasn't written in such a way that it's like, oh, I'm physically, like, feeling this death of these characters. It's more just like, he's dead, we have to move on, like, kind of thing, and, like, not really, I don't know, so I didn't like that. And then I felt like I said kind of towards the beginning, just that it was hard to follow the characters and, like, their histories and stuff at the beginning, just because there were so many of them and so in depth, and just, I don't know. And then, like I said, it felt like there was really only one or two that we spent a whole lot of time on. So it was well written, I guess, but there were a lot of things that I would have changed about it. I don't know.
100-page book. I feel like she could have done much more with it within that 800-page book. It's just, and like you said, the characters that died, I didn't really much care because we barely even get to know them. And then the characters that she barely mentions but she mentions for quite a bit in one part, and then you never hear from them again. Like the Don Mata from Koskoro, like Loth keeps mentioning her every chance he gets. So I was like, oh, okay. So like later in the book, she's gonna pop up again. Riley's gonna figure out what the hell happened to her. No, we don't know. Maybe there's a hint. I thought there was a hint at the end, like the person that wrote to him at the end of the book. I was thinking maybe that was her, but we don't know. I don't know. Is that my interpretation? I guess. But it's just kind of like, what the hell? Why do you keep mentioning her if we're not gonna even figure out what the hell happened to her?
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of weird. The only death was a little sad and was Kit. I enjoyed his character that we got a little bit of him for because he was really funny.
He was. That was the only death that I cared about, I think, really, in the whole book, was because he was an enjoyable character, and I feel like he died really early in the book.
Yeah, but then once again, it's just like they mention like his death like one time, and then it's like, oh, okay, we're all over. And like he had like his person he was writing a poem to, like that does like why would they know all this stuff if there never is mentioned again? Like, did someone tell the lady that it was? Did you ever get to figure that out? No. So what's the point of mentioning? Is my take.
I think maybe if this book would have been in the queue before Brandon Sanderson's book, then it might have been like I might not have felt the same way about it. But after, I feel like even though I was super hesitant to get through Elantris or whatever, like I felt like I was constantly comparing this book to Elantris because of its similar. I mean, it's not like it was similar plot-wise at all, but just like the similarities of like the different worlds and just like that sort of thing. But Sanderson did a whole lot better of a job, in my opinion, of just like drawing you in and making the story like, I don't know. But I'm just, not that we're talking about that book, but I feel like had I read this one before I had read that one, I might not have been quite as critical.
Yeah, no, I did the same thing. I would compare, like, his plot was slow, just like this one, but it made me want to keep reading because I was like, oh, what's going to happen next? Like, it was engaging and the plot made sense to the overall story. Like, everything pieced well together, whereas this one, I feel like you could have picked out chunks of the plot and it wouldn't have changed this overall story that she was trying to tell. Whereas his, like, a lot of stuff was very, like, he would mention one thing and then, like, much later in a chapter that would tie to that and you're like, oh my god, that's why that happened. Oh, cool. Whereas this was like, okay, so where is this gonna come up again? And it never does. Yeah. So, no, I completely agree. I did the same thing.
So, next question. What did you guys think about the religious system that she wrote in the book? I guess I'll start on that one.
I thought she did a really good job building both the religious and the cultural systems in the book.
It felt real, and I did enjoy that. She showed and illustrated the complexities of what was going on in the system as well as culturally in the world and how that impacted the different characters. And I thought that was, at first I was frustrated because why are we learning this much about their religious system? And then it made sense later on because you could see how all that stuff impacted them differently based on how they felt about it, I guess. This also played into the politics of the novel, which, if we're going to compare it to Brandon Sanderson's book, I think that the political system here is weak compared to his. I really liked that about his book, but it was still enjoyable to read in hers. Barbara?
I thought you would go into greater detail, but that's fine. The religion part actually had a basis for the story plot, but it actually does tie into the book because, and I liked how she did the two different views that you see because, normally with religion, it's people take aspects of one religion and turn it into their own, and that's what she did in the book. Like, the overall religion that you first hear is the Berethnet, I'm not sure if I'm saying the last name correctly, line was done by it's not George, because this is what this book is based on, the St. George story. Gareth, is that his name? It starts with a G. I need to start writing these people's names down. There's just too many of them. But it starts with him and his wife, and in Sabrin's court in the kingdom of Inez. Is that Inez? How you say that? They believe that he is the one who slayed the nameless, who made slumber the nameless one. And it's their children, and it's the female line that continues to keep him imprisoned. And then you get Ead's, and she's saying, well, that's not how it happened in her religion side. It's the female, and her name is like Clarinet or something. Cleoland.
I think that's correct.
Know how to pronounce that correctly. In hers, it's like, no, she actually never enjoyed the guy. She actually rebuffed his advances, never lived with him in the court. She's the one who imprisoned the nameless one. She's the one who's correct, and like your guys' religion is totally like fake. And they even said like the heretics and stuff like that, and they pretty much call each other heretics the whole time. So it's kind of like, okay, so obviously they're both wrong, but part of it is somewhere in the truth here. So you get a little bit of that, and then come to find out that they're both wrong. The whole story was the creepy witch found this guy, raised him as her own, and then when he left, because he wanted to create the he and the nameless one was there, then he wanted to slay the nameless one and do all these cool stuff so he could have the power and the prestige of this. Well, it turns out he didn't. It was actually the girl who did it with another female who was like Kyo. I don't know how you. It's
your
just
guess is as good as mine.
Weird name that I cannot pronounce. Who is Tawny's line? So it's like all these people are like somehow related. It's confusing, but like it's Tawny's line with the jewel, and they're the ones who did it. And then the witch. This is the creepy part that I was not a huge fan. Pretty much seduces her son figure, but she goes on to love him as a romantic love, and he wants nothing to do with her. So she tricks him and pretty much makes him think that she is the girl that he wants, marries him, is the queen for a bit, has a child with him, but once she has that child, her magic dissipates because, I guess childbearing in this world is so powerful that you can't keep her magic. He realizes that he just screwed his mom figure, hates himself, hangs himself, but prior to this, like, makes sure no one remembers, and then makes up this religion for people to still believe in something, because that's what they believed in. And it turns into this whole religion-based system. And it's so interesting and intertwined how, like, she made all that. I thought that was very interesting, and you get to figure out like what actually happened, and it's kind of creepy towards the end. And the only reason why they kept having daughters that all looked the same, and it was one daughter to keep the line, the Berethnet line, was because the mom was a witch, and she was like a sorceress and who had powers, and that's why. And I thought that was really cool, because I was like, is she going to explain why they all have daughters that all look the same? Come to find out they all look like her. Kind of creepy. But so I thought that was well done. And that's from the whole plot, that's the only well-drawn plot of the whole thing. That's it. That's the whole plot is right there. Based on this religion, who he said, she said, this is what actually happened. You find out much later in the book, this is how it happened.
Right.
That's it. That's the plot. That's literally the plot, is that. And that's the only thing that she did well, in the sense that all of that makes sense. Everything else about the rest of the book has no bearing towards that part of the plot whatsoever.
That's true.
I really butchered how that happened, but
no, I think you did a pretty good job.
That's what happened.
Lauren, what did you think about the religious system?
I feel like, so the 6 virtues and the different religious things that they discussed, like was more reminiscent of like chivalry than Christianity theology, I guess, if that makes sense for the virtues. But then I also felt like that the politics and religion, I feel like all of these types of novels seem to have like some sort of deeply intricate like political religious like stuff intertwined into it. But it seemed like no one person or group necessarily had like all the answers or like was 100% correct, which kind of, I mean, was interesting. They were all like all of everybody's beliefs were flawed in one way or another, or shaped by history or their political like upbringing. And that kind of mirrors like real world history, I guess, and religion, because it's like everybody, but then like Barbara said, like they figure out the truth about whatever, and then for 1,000 years they've believed these different things, and all of a sudden they're introduced with this truth, and then everybody's like, okay, cool. Like nobody's gonna go into like an uprising over the beliefs that they've held for 1,000 years. Like that I found interesting.
Yeah, that was definitely interesting that
Well, they didn't. So for Sabrin's Ines court, she said that she was going to slowly tell her people the true story. She wasn't going to all tell them at once. So only a few people were privy to what actually happened and how their religion was based on false pretenses. So she's not going to just be like all this dump pile on them and they're going to be like, what the hell? That's kind of mentioned in the book. But I'm curious to know, like Tawny believed that the dragons were gods to them. So I wanted more of their religion. Like, why did they think they were gods? Like, why did they not believe in the Virtudum and they were like, oh, the dragons are our gods and all this stuff? Like, I wanted more of that religion. So I wish she would have touched. No, she just, it was because they were the water dragons and they lived for years and protect them from the nameless one the first time around from the first battle. And that's all you get from that. So it's kind of like, well, okay. And there's other countries or countries? I don't know. Are we calling them countries? Kingdoms? Other kingdoms. Yeah. That favored the water dragons too. Like Tawny's culture and stuff like that. Like her king had a dragon that was pretty much the patriarch of it. And he was just a stand-in and listened to the dragon. I wanted more of, like when we heard about him, like I wanted more of that. Like, for them, we had enough of that.
She wanted more dragons.
I wanted more dragons.
I think we all did.
Last but not least, the final question. So the magic system thing we're going to talk about.
Okay, so the magic system, like I said before, I thought that the magic was cool. I don't have like a whole lot of complaints about the magic system. I think that like Barbara has said multiple times, I would have liked more dragons. And seeing more dragons in that aspect, just because I feel like their magic was super cool.
What was there was limited, and it was, primarily Priory used. There was a little bit about the other side and the witch, right? But it was mostly, the primary magic system was Ead's. And I thought hers was well written. There wasn't a lot of magic in the book other than the dragons, and like you said, the witch obviously was a pretty big one, but not a whole lot. What did you think, Barbara?
So there's the two types of magic, and Ead and the Priory use one of them, and the only other character that uses the other one, and she uses both, is the witch, the Lady of the Woods, whatever.
That's what they call her,
the Lady of the Woods. And there wasn't a lot of it. Like Ead is it. No other character does. And I thought for Tawny, when she ate from the fruit of the orange tree, that she would have been able to do the magic and stuff like that. But I guess she didn't know the incantation stuff for it. She just got the the extra hearing and the senses and the quickness and that kind of stuff that came with eating from the tree. So I would have liked more of it. I thought it was a cool way of doing it and stuff like that. Like, we didn't know what their limits were as far as the magic was concerned, since it was just one character out of the rest that really used it. And the witch was like a shapeshifter. Like, she changes forms and stuff like that. Like, when you first meet her, she looks completely different. Come to find out, she's also the dragon that took away Sabrin's baby, to cut off the line and all that crap. That was her. She transformed into the dragon. It was also her. She looks just like Sabrin because it's her line, her magic that makes them all look the same. So that whole part of the magic was really cool. I enjoyed that, and maybe that's why I kind of enjoyed her character as the bad guy, and you don't find out she's a bad guy until later and stuff like that, because she was the only other magic character that did the magic that I thought was really neat. And then obviously the dragons, like I kind of mentioned earlier, like how they flew, and how I've never read a book where there were like the flying dragons, the bad guys were the fire breather, and then the other dragons were water dragons. Like, normally it's, like a snake or something like that, that's the water. But no, there were dragons too. They just preferred the water and how they flew and how they did pouch. And I thought that was so cool. And I wanted more of it, and we never got it. So I thought it was a little lackluster. Like, there could have been more. And what I got, I really loved, but I wanted more instead of like, here's a random place. Okay,
no, I 100% agree there. All right, guys, we've reached this point in the podcast where we're going to talk about our actual scores, our individual scores. We're just going to go in order here. So, Barbara, I'll let you share your score first.
So I've been wanting to compare, because when I originally started scoring the books for the podcast, I started scoring them against like books that I loved, and I feel like that wasn't fair in doing that. So now I just want to compare to the books that we've read throughout the podcast. So this was not as good as A Darker Shade of Magic, and this wasn't as good as Elantra, because I felt like those two books are also considered fantasy. They did a much better job of building their world and moving the plot along. Really good characters. So I feel like that's a third for me, and that's why I gave it a score of, once again, Michael hates my score, of a 7.25, because I feel like it was just below Elantris. Like, it was good enough. I enjoyed it. I wish there was less of certain things, but I enjoyed the characters more than some other of the books that we've read that didn't have these aspects. So that's why I rated it a 7.25.
All right, Lauren, you're up.
So I don't remember what I rated Elantris, but I feel like I should probably go back and give it a higher rating after reading this one, because I feel like I said earlier, I just feel like I enjoyed it more, and it was more comprehensive. But anyway, I gave it a 6 out of 10, and it was mostly just because of the things that we've mentioned over and over. Not enough dragons, just really, really long, lots of things that could have been omitted, just different. I mean, that's why I took off points, is for all the things that I've already mentioned. And then, I mean, I think I couldn't give it just like a 4 or a 5, because, I mean, the writing was well done for the most part, and the characters were well thought out and well written, and most of them had like full circle, like, kind of closure. Not all of them, but I did enjoy just the storyline in general when I was able to follow it. So that was why I got 6 and not 5.
I also decided to go with Barbara's system of comparing just with the books that we've read in the podcast as opposed to. So it wasn't as good as a lot of the books I've read. It wasn't as good as Elantris. It wasn't as Darker, and it wasn't as good as Next Year in Havana. So I gave this one a 7.7. I hate myself for doing that, because it was the If it's a Barbara score, I hate giving that detail. I mean, he does. There shouldn't be that. But I did it because that's where it fell. 7.75 is the only fair rating. So that's what I gave it. Which, like I mentioned earlier, that's why our group score ended up at a 7, solid C.
Huh?
I think we all enjoyed it enough. None of us would have called it our favorite book, but we all enjoyed it, and we all would primarily recommend it.
I would like to point out how this was a character-driven book, and yet we mostly talked about the plot, and that's why plot is important, because that's what you were like. Yeah, the characters are great and stuff like that, but they can't carry a book.
Yep.
And I think that was the biggest issue with this. It's like, tried carrying the book, and as much as I loved all of it, it was just hard to follow not even hard to follow the plot, but it was just non-existent. And it's like, okay, like if it's just a character, don't make it a 800-page book about characters.
Thank you so much for listening. We are Badass Literature Society. Hopefully you liked us and liked this episode. If you didn't, let us know. But if you did, especially let us know, because those ratings really matter on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is @BadassLitPod. And if you've got a book recommendation, let us know. We've got a lot of book recommendations lining up. I want to add more to the list.
And once again, I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
And we will see you guys next month for The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
Woo! Another fantasy book.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.